Hello and welcome to the latest episode of What the FinTech, the podcast from the team behind FinTech Futures and the Banking Technology magazine. My name is Paul Hindle, editor at FinTech Futures, and as we approach the end of what has been another eventful year in FinTech, it's once again time for our annual end-of-year review, where we take a look back at some of the big trends to come out of 2024 and what areas to keep an eye on as we head into 2025. Just to quickly mention for our regular listeners, this will be the final episode of Season 5 of What the FinTech, and we'll be back early next year with, you guessed it, Season 6 of the show. And I'd just like to start by saying a big thank you to all of our guests this year, and of course you listening at home for making Season 5 of the podcast our biggest yet. And we look forward to bringing you plenty more insights from the wonderful world of financial services in the years ahead. So, as we record this, it's now mid-December and the holiday season is now well and truly upon us. And to cast an eye over the year that has been, I'm joined by two people who should be very familiar to fans of the FinTech Futures website, as not only are they both regular columnists, they're also both hosts of the popular Dave and Dharm Demystify podcast. And they are, of course, Dave Wallace and Dharmesh Mistry. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Yeah, wanted to be on the show again.
Excellent. Yeah, you mentioned you were on our review show last year as well, Dharmesh. So I think you're both actually the first return guests that we've had on the show. Now, Dave, obviously you did an episode back in 2022 as well. But how's your 2024 been?
It's been very eventful, actually. And when I say event, Dave has been taking me to so many events across different countries. I'm literally evented out now.
Nice. And how about you, Dave?
Yeah, no, I think it's actually, I guess some of the highlights have been attending some of the events that we have in Dubai, Lithuania. I went to a great conference in Cyprus as well. And I guess what you're kind of seeing is the move of fintech out kind of globally. And there's real sense that whereas the center of gravity of fintech used to be, I guess, London, it really is now sort of it moved out around the world. So it's been great to meet people across the world who are really passionate about fintech. So I think that's been the big thing, hasn't it?
That's a good point you raised right at the end, is I feel like when I go to events, fintech events in the UK, they're kind of running out of steam. Like the energy and the enthusiasm has left. Whereas when we went to Dubai and Lithuania, the energy is just like, oh, this is fresh and exciting, and it's like at another level almost. That's been interesting from my perspective, is just how much more drive there is elsewhere, whereas it's a bit passé here now.
I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about that as we go through the episode today. But to just get started, maybe for those listening who aren't familiar, we could just do a couple of quick introductions. Maybe Dharmesh, we can start off with you.
Sure, I'm Dharmesh Mistry. I would say I'm having a fractional career these days. So I'm an advisor to a few companies in the tech space, specifically in financial services and technology. I obviously co-host the Dave and Dharm Demystify podcast with Dave. And along with Dave, we also provide some consultancy to fintechs in growth strategies and generating content.
And I'm very similar. You know, I'm lucky enough to have a portfolio approach to my career at the moment. So have a few fingers in a few pies. And it's actually fantastic because it kind of gives you a very broad view as to what's kind of going on. So my background is sort of user experience and design, but, you know, actually spending time with Dharmesh, that whole technology kind of bug has sort of started rubbing off on me. So I'm getting more and more interested in essentially how technology is really driving some of the changes that are happening and what it means. But I'll always go back to experience, to be honest with you. But one of the things I absolutely love is writing for FinTech Futures. And thank you so much, Paul, because I think you give Dharmesh and I a huge amount of latitude in some terms of some of the subjects that we cover. And, you know, occasionally I'll send you something and go, oh, Paul, I'm not sure if you'll take this on. It's a bit out there. And you always come back and say, no, I think it's fine. But you know, that writing has been just such a nice way of kind of, I guess, exploring the world, but also organizing my thoughts as well. So I always feel very peaceful after I've written a piece. And, you know, I don't know, maybe people read it, maybe they don't, but it kind of doesn't matter. So I've really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, no worries. And obviously, thank you both for contributing for the last few years as well. It's fair. And like I say, it's always fun I think having different views and, like I say, having some ideas that are a bit more out there can be good and really adds to the mix of content that we have on the site. So it's all really great. And obviously, thanks again so much for joining me today and speaking on the podcast today as well. As we kind of touched on just at the start of the show as well, Dharmesh, you were on our review show last year. And we kicked off last year's episode with a look at everybody's favorite topic, which was generative AI. And it seems 12 months later, Gen AI is still very much the talk of the town. So I thought we might as well start again there this year. So to kick things off, another 12 months down the line, what do you say are the big trends that you've been seeing with Gen AI over the last 12 months?
Well, I mean, clearly it's been the improvements in the models and the range of things that we deal with. Like it's no longer, a 5-second video. It's a few minutes of video. It's documents, it's images, it's everything. But the model capabilities, the progress of those have been absolutely phenomenal. I have to say that I generally tend to flip between something like Gemini and ChatGPT, Perplexity when I'm doing research, etc. But I'm having a new favorite, and I'm actually starting to feel like I'm entering the film Her with Claude, and Claude is blowing me away. Quite frankly, it's becoming my new best pal. I literally will ask Claude anything. I like buying a new treadmill. What do I think will happen with the river flows based on the recent weather? Anything. And obviously, I use Claude for my research too. But quite frankly, the engagement is what separates it from the others. It literally is like having a best pal that just genuinely seems interested in what you're asking, why you're asking, trying to get better context so it can give you a better answer. I mean, the guys at Anthropic are smashing it. And I just see when we start to talk about next year, there'll be more of this stuff. The other things that quite amazed me were things like HeyGen, the ability to create your own deep fakes, in effect. That is just phenomenal. So I know last year we talked about Gen AI, but the progress across the board has just been amazing.
I think for me, it's the models. Like, I guess if you stood back and kind of looked at how we're dealing with them now and what we're getting out of them, it's so different from last year. And I mean, it was like magic last year, and now it's incredible. So I think what I've begun to observe is some sort of fundamental sort of structural changes. So Gen AI is now becoming more and more part of the operating system. So you can't actually escape it now. It's there and present. I think in terms of finance, what we're seeing is a kind of move, I think, gradually where I think Gen AI to date has been used internally and maybe for things like kind of supporting call centers. But gradually you're seeing people taking those first tentative steps around customer engagement. So we actually visited Kareem this year in Dubai, and one of the things that they just launched was a sort of Gen AI product, which was sort of out in the market. And that was around kind of finding restaurants. But it was kind of interesting that this was a sort of proper customer experience. And I think that move into being more kind of connected with the end customer, I think is fascinating. The other thing is, my background is marketing, and I think what you are genuinely seeing is a massive transformation caused by Gen AI and marketing. And I think the ripples of that, they'll kind of go on for the next few years. But I think marketing is one of the industries which has been incredibly impacted by what Gen AI can do. And I think into 2025, we'll see sort of massive changes. So marketeers are able to do so much less, to be honest with you. And I think that's kind of changing dynamics.
Just to add to Dave's point, this progress, if we just compare when Dave and I were first putting banks online from about 97 onwards, right, to when really it became not just about putting your bank online, but having a full-on digital strategy. Well, that took over 10 years. It was only after about 2012 that banks was really starting to think about digital strategies, not just about putting yourself on the internet and having a mobile application, but a broader perspective on digitization. So you can say safely it's taken about 10 years before it became more strategic than just about self-service banking. But what I'm seeing now is the ability for real transformational capability with AI that will fundamentally change banking within the next 5 years. Banking is not going to be what it is today within 5 years. So we won't be waiting 10 years for the transformation. And people that can't make the jump now to get involved, I think have limited kind of futures, quite frankly.
Yeah, I guess that kind of touches on where I wanted to go next with it. I mean, we've seen so much change, as you mentioned, over the last 12 months. What do you think is going to happen over 2025 now? What do you think the next steps are? What are the big kind of use cases you think are really kind of driving the next stage in 2025?
If I'm going to make a prediction about 2025, I think we're going to see more than one bank exposed by a poor implementation of AI that affected customers. I posted this year on LinkedIn feedback I got from a chatbot when I said I was having problems with the mobile application. It basically came back and said, sorry for your loss, as if somebody in the family had died, which to me was a rather extreme use case of something going wrong. But I think we will see some more of that because I think the momentum is urging people on. And when you see things going right, you kind of quickly want to follow. But like I said, if you haven't been doing your homework already, then the danger is that you rush in too quickly. So I think we'll see some of that. Clearly, we'll see the models expand even further. And with Moore's law and pro capability, I just think we're getting this confluence, which we talked about in the Limitless presentation that we did this year, that the confluence of the progress of more memory, better broadband, faster processing, better AI models, all of this adds to transformation in the industry. And I think we're going to start to see that, not necessarily from the banks, but from newer players coming to play next year.
I agree with that. I think what you may see is an expectation gap kind of really emerging between what people expect to see and what they do see. Because going back to the presentation Dharmesh and I did around Limitless, I think that the limiting factor is actually imagination now. So all the kind of core pieces are there to be able to deliver like incredible customer experiences. I really take Dharmesh's point that there will be probably some whoppers out there where it all goes wrong. But I think that will be because it was badly implemented, not because it was ill-conceived. But I think this whole thing around kind of really thinking through what does the experience mean? How does it work? How do you get customers involved? Like Dharmesh talked about Claude like it was a human being. And it's actually something I've written about is this whole thing of we say please and sorry to ChatGPT or Claude. We are starting to treat them in a very kind of humanistic way. I think it's that which is interesting. So if banks can work out how to kind of reconnect with their customers in that sort of emotional way using these technologies, then as far as I'm concerned, they're kind of off to the races. If they just sort of implement stuff for the sake of it, then they're going to struggle. But they have to really get some imagination around what this actually means. But the great news is that's the limiting factor, not the technology. So I think we're at this interesting moment where actually the technology is probably more advanced than we're capable of. And I think these models are kind of really driving that acceleration. And I read today that Google think they're not going to kind of evolve as quickly as they have done. And I'm like, well, maybe that's true or maybe not, because actually every time one of these models comes out, you can see a massive step change in what they offer.
Well, I mean, to that point, one of the things that Claude can do is it can use kind of RPA on your desktop to automate basic tasks. That is a massive step forward in what's possible by people just talking to their computer. And that also, the 4.0 ChatGPT, where you can converse rather than type, is also a massive step forward. So already there. What typically we've seen with banks this year is the silo-based mentality that has existed for banks since they were derived or incepted. And that is, where can we apply AI? A technology looking for a problem across the organization, right? I think by the end of next year, we will start to see, and you heard it here first, is agentic banking architecture, where we look beyond the silos and say, well, if the entire organization used AI, what would our architecture look like? Starting with that and then implementing on a use case basis. So as you do that, you end up with the architecture that you wanted, not the spaghetti mess that has happened over the decades of doing silo-based implementations for different products, different channels, different business processes, different customer segments, blah, 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 blah. So hopefully banks will have learned their lessons. And by the end of next year, some of the forward-looking banks will already have an agentic banking architecture in place. If not, come and talk to us.
I think Dharmesh is really onto something. I think there's money being poured into agentic from the big tech companies. They're all developing these kind of models. There's use cases already where sort of software agents are talking to each other and able to kind of resolve issues and come up with solutions before actually engaging with an operator. So it is all kind of happening in the background. And I think Dharmesh is right. Like, it kind of needs to be formalized into an architecture. And I think that is something that we will kind of definitely see next year. It's sort of so obvious in many ways that's what will happen when you kind of sit and think about it. It would be, I think, really surprising if it doesn't happen.
Sounds great. And I feel like we could just do a full episode on AI. So I will move us on quickly now into another topic of the year. But one thing I know that you've both been interested in this year is quantum computing. And I find quantum computing really interesting topic, but the science behind it does have a tendency to melt my brain slightly. So we won't get into too much of the details around how it all works. But it's interesting learning more. I mean, Dave, I know you wrote an article about it recently as well, just demystifying the basics of quantum computing. Now, I'm putting basics in air quotes there because even the basics are quite advanced when it comes to quantum. But if you're interested in the inner workings of quantum computing, then I'd very much recommend reading that. And also, I recorded an episode of the podcast with Dr. Philip Interlora, head of quantum technologies at HSBC earlier this year as well, which got very in-depth on the topic as well. So again, if you're listening and you want to check that out as well, then feel free to do so. But like I said, with quantum then, over the last year, what are some of the big trends that you've noticed around quantum then? And Dave, maybe we could start with you with that one.
It's kind of interesting because what you're seeing is quantum, which was, I think a few years ago, everybody was really excited about as kind of one of those things on heading into the hype cycle. I think it's kind of come out the other side. And now what you're definitely seeing is a sort of normalization of businesses really thinking very hard about it as a technology. And also you've got kind of nation states who are really thinking about the consequences of not being prepared for a quantum world. So there's two kind of core things going on. One is a race from nation states to achieve essentially the point when a quantum computer works almost seamlessly. So one of the big problems that quantum computers have is with errors, and they're very prone to becoming destabilized as well. So nation states are rushing to the point where they will have a stable quantum computer. But also companies are seeing the opportunity and there's kind of money pouring into it. So I think one of the big trends is, I think quantum's coming out of the hype cycle into growth now. So quantum computers are, I think, evolving very rapidly. I mean, I'm just going to read you something from The Guardian today, which is sort of mind-blowing. This is Google unveils mind-boggling quantum computer chip. It measures just 4 centimeters squared, but possesses almost inconceivable speed. In just 5 minutes, it completes a task that would take 10 septillion years, a number that far exceeds the age of our universe, for a normal computer, for a standard computer. So there are massive strides going on in quantum computing. There are still problems, as I say, but there's massive strides going on. And I think what's happening is the reality and the promise of it is kind of tantalizingly close.
What I'd add to Dave is, what's interesting, I guess, is unlike with AI where you can find a dozen use cases straight away, that's not necessarily the case with quantum. It's not like we're going to see use cases across the entire bank for quantum. But one thing's for sure is that a number of the banks are already taking Q-Day, the day when quantum computers can break existing encryption algorithms. They're starting to take that seriously, and that's becoming something that, like a plan, a bit like Y2K. This thing is going to, except we don't know the date. Y2K, we knew the date at least, right? So we had to go through all our systems and identify where the date fields were. With quantum, we're going to have to go through all our systems and work out where we're using encryption, what's being encrypted, and when it gets decrypted, it will matter. And could somebody have got hold of that encrypted data and be looking at it in raw format now? So there's a bit more in-depth analysis to be done, but it's a serious risk going forward because this is people's financial data. So I think that's been clearly part of what's been going on this year gone, and will carry on going forward because obviously we're not at Q Day yet. We're just in the preparation phase.
I think the whole thing of Q Day will drive a lot of behavior. It's at the moment, it's a bit of an existential risk. I think the people in the know believe that this Q Day will happen within the next decade or so. And actually, it turns out that most banks and large companies have no idea what the crypto, sort of the state of cryptography in their businesses actually is. So they've got sort of 10 years to understand what that is, 10 years to kind of update the algorithms and all the other bits and pieces. So it's kind of interesting because it's sort of the work around this has to start now. And I guess what you're seeing is already platforms like iOS and Android, those have all got post-crypto quantum algorithm cryptography built in. I think I've said that right. But so this stuff is going on. It's kind of fascinating because, I mean, Dharmesh and I, on our hit list for 2025 is to go and see a few quantum computers because they're extraordinary things in their own right. You know, the way, and you talk about the science of it. My head hurts every time I sort of think about it. But I talked to a chap called Yuval Bogia from QEra Computers, and they use lasers to hold single protons in space, and then they use laser tweezers to bring these protons together, and that's where the quantum work happens. And I'm like, I mean, who thinks of this stuff? It's kind of incredible. So these things are there. I think the other thing to say is it's not just about computing. There's sort of quantum sensors. We're going to be talking to someone this week who does actual random number generators using quantum technology. So there's a whole field which is kind of out there. And I think it's been really good fun to kind of actually understand a lot more about it. I have to say that the quantum fraternity are just the most wonderful, lovely people. They've all been so kind with their time, and just the people we've met have been brilliant at explaining it. And then when we look at them like we have no idea what you're talking about, they're very, very good at kind of going back and kind of talking us, because it's very complex stuff at the end of the day. But, you know, it's actually, I've been talking to one of my sons, and, you know, he's got quite a good maths brain and understands physics. And I'm like, if I was you, I'd really think about quantum as a career, because I think it's going to be massive going forward.
Oh, for sure. And I guess the big message here then for financial services, if you're not already exploring quantum, now's the time to get started, right?
We've actually just launched on the Dave and Dharm Demystify show an interview with Steve Flinter from MasterCard, and he talks about what they're doing. Absolutely 100%. Forget about Dharm and me. Listen to what he's got to say, though, because it's really interesting what MasterCard, they both sit from a kind of defensive point of view from Q-Day, but also proactively. So quantum is very good at crunching massive, massive amounts of data. And for MasterCard, fraud is a massive issue, which involves lots of data. So they're using quantum technologies to understand that data and look out behaviors so that they can start getting ahead of fraud before it happens, which is very minority report, I know. But so I thought that was really interesting. I think your interview with Philip from HSBC, again, fascinating, because he talks about what the bank is doing with this stuff. And I think the more you listen to what people are saying in terms of the practical use cases, the better, because it helps bring this stuff to life. But if I was a large organization, I would definitely have somebody looking at quantum right now, or a small organization, actually.
So I guess moving on to the next topic then, regular listeners will know that we end our episodes with our Fintech Jail segments, which is where we ask for an industry term, buzzword or trend that our guests have seen or heard enough of and cast it away. But we also let our guests break words out of the jail. And in our end of year review episode last year, Dharmesh, you released the word crypto from the jail.
Very clever, Dharmesh, you were right.
Premonition again. But again, the crypto and the wider Web3 space, technology behind it like blockchain and tokenization, again, I've been seeing plenty of activity again across this year. So what are some of the trends that you've been seeing around crypto in financial services then over the last year?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this year we got Bitcoin ETFs, Ethereum ETFs. One for Ripple is probably on the way soon. Obviously, the Trump administration is a game changer in the entire space because the SEC were hot on the heels of every crypto player. if Trump didn't get in, we were pretty sure that crypto was going to be under the cosh even further in the US. And as most of the miners had shifted from China to the US, you're going to see that shift happening again, possibly elsewhere. But what there is now is a more positive sentiment around crypto. What we haven't seen really is a broad brush acknowledgement about its underlying capabilities. Things like blockchain have gone through the hype cycle, but people are still not able to differentiate between crypto technology and what it brings versus crypto as a token of value. Both are extremely important. Both are probably going to have massive impacts, in the coming years. And I hate to say this again, it's going to be a very exciting year for crypto too next year. So we'll start to see people taking more of an interest to try and understand what this stuff is. And that will drive further applications of the technology itself. So I think it'll be a big year for crypto generally. Whether it's a big year for banks, that remains to be seen. I think my prediction for next year is that a UK bank will either launch its own store of value, like its own custody for crypto, or it'll acquire one, a bit like what we've seen with Robinhood and Ziglu. I think we're going to see some acquisitions of custody plays for UK retail banks because the momentum behind crypto investing is there. That'll be my prediction for next year on crypto. But I'm more excited about the underlying distributed technology. If we look at some of the things that we're worried about, data centralization being a prime case, not only social media, but also within banks, I fully believe that we should be owning our data and we should be being rewarded for sharing our data. At the moment, we tend to give it away because we want an application. I think distributed technology has a long-term play in much more of what we do, similar to AI, similar to quantum. I think the distributed technology is the new architecture for banking going forward because the centralization doesn't make sense, not for the organization and not for the consumer.
I just wanted to add, because I think Dharmesh has covered that very comprehensively. I just wanted to add that I think Donald Trump's victory is pivotal because basically what he's providing is a stable platform for everybody now to go, well, look, crypto is a thing now. So I think it will really energize what goes on in the marketplace. So, it'd be interesting to see what happens over the next few years, to be honest with you. But I suspect crypto will become a lot more mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how slow the US has been with pretty much every innovation on financial services technology. Open banking only launched recently. Faster payments only recently. Then if you go to the US, contactless payments isn't still everywhere like it is here in Europe, right? So they've been slow literally on every financial services technology innovation. And you could say the same is true with crypto. But under a Trump regime, I think that's just got the kick up the that it probably needed for the US perspective. And that will be transformational again because of the number of people that have already invested in crypto in the US. Right? The numbers are staggering.
Excellent. I guess from a UK perspective as well, I mean, back in 2022, the then UK government announced its plan to make the UK a global crypto asset technology hub. Obviously, since then, we've had a new government come in. But I mean, how much progress do you think has been made there? And do you think, given that the US is seemingly renewed drive with the Trump administration coming in, do you think the UK is going to be able to keep up with the US in that regard?
Well, I think it's not just the US. I mean, it's like you go to the Middle East and Dubai is very set up for virtual assets. Dharmesh and I met with a virtual asset regulator. So they've set up a regulator around this. They're encouraging companies to come in. They're providing an environment which is very benign around all of this. Honestly, I think we're well behind the US, I think the Middle East, places like Nigeria, where amazing things are kind of going on from a kind of crypto point of view. And so it goes on and on. I think the UK is really taking its eye off the ball around it.
Yeah, I've been to a few events recently from Think Digital and Tech UK focused on government and their use of technology. That in itself is a very sad state of affairs. Firstly, we don't have a digital infrastructure in the UK, beginning with digital ID, topped by digital payments, etc. Yet we think we're at the forefront of technology. But I'm sorry to say, we may have been at one point a leader in technology. We better get very good at being a fast follower because we're already behind, as Dave has said. And if we're not careful, we're going to be a laggard if we're not careful. I think we've got the opportunity to kind of leverage being a fast follower because in some cases, that actually makes sense to be a fast follower, right? If you look at India, they didn't jump on the 3G bandwagon. They jumped on the 4G bandwagon at a fraction of the cost. So for almost the same money that went into the UK for rolling out 3G, they rolled out across a much bigger nation, across 1 billion people, 4G. So sometimes it does pay to be second, to kind of plan ahead for the next iteration. But in the case of things like crypto, quantum, AI, we're still playing catch up.
Well, I guess moving on from crypto then, I mean, another area that I know you wanted to touch on as well was the DORA regulation, Digital Operational Resilience Act. The deadline is coming in 17th of January, so a couple of weeks from now. I mean, what's your take on that? How has the industry been preparing for DORA over the last year?
I think everyone has been doing their due diligence, getting their plans and making some movement towards it. But in a similar vein to the open banking side of things, the real action only happened after. And I think banks have got their plans in place and know where their biggest risks are. But the real work's yet to be done. I don't think any of the banks are fully prepared a major outage, as was shown by the events at Microsoft and CrowdStrike this year. So we know that's the case. I think the real work is yet to happen. And that's my prediction for next year, is that banks start to make some real progress on mitigating the risks.
I know less about DORA than Dharmesh, but I do feel that, the story's really just about to really start, to be honest. So my impression is one of people aren't really sure what's going to happen. So I think they're not as prepared as perhaps they should be. But then I suspect the way it's been kind of rolled out leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So I think it's going to be interesting, but certainly one of the things it has the opportunity to do is to kind of really get people to think about their systems and how fit for purpose they are. So one of the things going on is that sort of, how do we make sure that what we have is not only resilient, but also fit for purpose in this new digital world? So I think it's one of those things which will kind of is a catalyst for change as well as a sort of piece of legislation.
What surprises me is that a bit like the silos, right? And this is why Dave and I really like to go over history, because you can learn so much from it. And what we learned from Y2K was we didn't know enough about our software. So we had to go through all of our software to find where the date field had to be changed. What we're going to learn about quantum is we don't know about our software where it uses encryption. So we'd have to go all over our software about encryption. We went through similar phases with open source. At some point, banks start to realize that some of this open source that we're using willy-nilly only has 2 people writing code in their shed for the last 10 years, but it's being used by millions of companies, so we think it's safe. It's not so safe. So gradually we realized over time we know very little about our software other than that we've tested it and it seems to work, but we don't really know all aspects about it. And DORA is another case and example. Very similar to open source, we don't know when we start to outsource stuff to the cloud, which is the general movement, what other stuff is sitting in the cloud behind the services that we buy. So let's say I buy banking as a service from a vendor, but when I buy that, I'm buying it from the vendor. But behind the vendor could be umpteen other solutions that they're subcontracted to do, let's say, credit risk or fraud analysis or whatever. And now we're having to go down the rabbit hole searching out who are the vendors behind the vendors when it comes to DORA, because it could be some tiny piece of outsource in the cloud service is being run by a 2-man dog outfit. We don't know. So we could mimic an outage of our cloud provider, but that doesn't mimic the outage or somebody for solutions down the line, running on some disparate other cloud. So I think the complexities about DORA is exactly that. It's the layers and layers of potential cloud solutions that we don't hear and see about.
Excellent. Yeah, well, exciting times. Like I said, the deadline for compliance is 17th of Jan, so we haven't got too long to wait until we see that all.
And well done, all of us, for not talking about Dora the Explorer as well. So.
It is hard when you say Dora.
Yeah. I think they really missed the trick, to be honest with you.
Very, very conscious of time. So maybe just to wrap things up then, I mean, obviously we've mentioned a few things over the course of the episode, but looking ahead to 25, I mean, are there any other trends that you're most excited about, I think, moving into the new year? Dave, maybe we could start with you for that.
So I downloaded Apple Intelligence, and you're kind of seeing that as an operating system, it's becoming much broader even than it was before. And I really think that, like, going into 2025, Apple's going to make some big moves into finance, not because they want to be a bank, but because finance is just another way of tying their customers into their ecosystem and sort of delighting their customers. And it's kind of interesting because I'm on the beta for Apple Intelligence, which you have to use US settings. And I suddenly realized there's something called Apple Cash, which we don't have access to in the UK. But Apple Cash is really, I guess it's like Venmo or whatever. You can move money between phones. And to me, it's another nail in the coffin of why you'd go to your bank in the first place. So I think Apple will make a big move around finance, not because, as I say, they want to be a bank, but because it makes sense from a kind of customer proposition point of view.
Excellent. Sounds good. And Dharmesh, any predictions from your side as well?
I want to say wallets next year, into not for payments, but for data, specifically ID. But I think it's wishful thinking. I really want it to happen in the UK that I can hold my passport or my driving license in my Android or Google wallet, and for Dave, his Apple wallet. But I just can't see it happening in the UK, which I think is a crying shame, because I think it holds back the whole idea that a wallet isn't just for money. It's also for your personal data. And that would lead to a massive transformation in many other aspects of digitization that we need to go through. One that's dear to my heart is like buying a home. If we digitize that, which I know Maria Harris is working hard at, but she's being held up by other things, specifically things like digital ID. So if we can get wallets holding personal data better and making that a framework for sharing, I think we would see other digitization programs happening. I hope it happens by the end of next year, but I'm a bit concerned it might not.
Plenty of stuff to be looking forward to then in the next year. But thank you again so much, both of you, for joining me for the podcast today. As hinted at earlier, it's now time for our FinTech Jail segment to finish things off. And in the spirit of the season, we'll be having our now annual holiday amnesty, and we'll be looking to release some words out of the jail. Dharmesh, I believe you've got a word that you want to throw in as well as one that you want to break out. So maybe we can start off with the one that you want to throw into the jail first.
God, you can tell what sort of Christmas they have in the Mistry households, can't they?
Gosh, the one that I want to throw in, because it baffles me as well, is quantum entanglement. A, it's hard to say, and B, it's just really hard to explain as well. So better put it in jail.
Spooky science at a distance. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, well, there we go. Yeah. Shall I do the one that I want to release, or?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
And the one that I want to release, which I think is really important, is wealth management. Because if we start to think about the future of banks, yes, we absolutely need them. And as Bill Gates said, yeah, we need banking. We don't necessarily need banks, right? I think one of the benefits of AI being involved in finance is it democratizing financial advice and helping those people that have poor financial literacy. And that doesn't mean you don't have a lot of money. It just means that you're very bad at managing it, right? But also those people that don't have a lot of money need help and advice as well. And as we know, that's been left to the confines of the people that have a lot of money. So I would like to bring back wealth management, because I think AI will democratize wealth management and bring it to everybody, and also to a level that doesn't, it's irrespective of whether you have money. You'll have good financial advice and planning capability, whatever the amount or not of money that you have.
Excellent. Sounds great. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And certainly with the cost of living crisis as well we've had in recent years, wealth management has certainly been seeing a lot of activity. And we're seeing a lot of new money management apps and services being launched globally this year. So more than happy to release wealth management from the jail. Dave, what about you? What's your selection for this year?
So I want to release digital transformation because I think we've never needed digital transformation more than this moment in time. And in actual fact, I've always thought digital transformation is a bit of, I can see why it's gone into the jail. So historically, it's been around value extraction. Like Dharmesh and I spent the last 30 years working with organizations to fluff up their processes and push more work to customers and essentially lower costs for organization. I think there's very little cost to be taken out anymore. So we're moving into digital transformation, but from a value creation point of view. So one of my favorite chats this year that we did with Suresh Balaji, who's the CMO of Lloyds Bank, and Gemma Daly, who leads his UX team. And what you realize is we might be heading to a kind of banking renaissance where these large organizations realize that the strength they have in their balance sheets means that they now have the opportunity to kind of look around and decide how they really create value for customers. And what was incredible about that discussion was how everything that they're doing at the moment really starts with the customer. And digital is really, that's the most important part of their puzzle. And, I know, Dharmesh, you heard Charlie Nunn talking last week, and he kind of made some similar points as well. So I think digital transformation is, we're going to see a renaissance in it, but really done properly, but from a value creation point of view.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Dave. I think for me, it's more radical than that. And I think business models are going to change fundamentally. And that's going to be driven by a combination of factors. In the same way that mobile got massively adopted because of cheaper, better screens, memory, broadband, a number of factors came together to make the mobile possible. I think a number of factors are coming together to make possible a new form of banking. And as I alluded to, part of that is a new kind of wealth management, one that services everyone, regardless of how much money they have. But that does mean this is a new kind of bank, not necessarily the ones that we've been used to that have basically profited off a poor infrastructure of payments. All of that is going to be gone with new digital rails coming downstream. We talked about crypto being possible replacement for that, whether it's a CBDC or not in the future. We definitely know new rails are coming, right? And so margins have eroded on payments anyway. Banks are going to have to find new ways of extracting value and providing value to customers, as Dave exactly said.
Excellent. Now, yeah, I think digital transformation has been in the jail for a while now. And I think largely because it's been overused in the past, and maybe that lack of specifics around what constitutes digital transformation made it very easy to overuse. But like I said, I think you both made a really good argument there. And I think it is time to give digital transformation some time out of the jail now. Let's hope it doesn't find itself as a repeat offender being thrown back in anytime soon as we go forward. But there we have it for the end of the year. We've got quantum entanglement going in, and wealth management and digital transformation coming out of the jail for this year. And that'll be it for this episode and for season 5 of the podcast. A big thanks again to all of you listening for your continued support. And we're already looking forward to getting started with season 6 in the new year. So keep an eye out for brand new episodes coming around the corner for that. And Dave and Dharmesh, thank you so much again for joining me for the podcast today to take a look back at the year that was and what's to come in the new year. Is there anything you can tell us about now with the Dave and Dharm Demystified podcast as well? Anything we can look forward to in the new year there?
So yeah, we've got some great episodes coming out. We've got a few more on quantum. So we've really been having a lot of chats with a lot of people about quantum. So we're kind of trying to build up a broader picture around that. We've got a great episode coming up on Bayan. So that's good. We're doing a short mini series on ESG with Shajil Bashir, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of First Abu Dhabi Bank. And he's written a superb book, and we're kind of helping him go through that and demystify sustainability. So yeah, we've got a huge amount.
We've got also Lada's new book launch, which we will go through in our podcast as well. Yeah, I mean, we've got some big names coming next year. Also, we're going to be talking a little bit more about DORA as well.
But that's DORA the Explorer, not...
Yeah, it's a season review of DORA the Explorer instead.
But again, thank you. We really appreciate FinTech Futures hosting us. It's fabulous. So thank you again to you and Tanya as well for all the support that you give us.
100%. Thank you so much.
No worries. No, it's great. It's great to have you there. Like I say, it's really interesting. Like I say, really looking forward to the new episodes as well coming in the new year. But thank you again both so much for chatting with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for this episode. A big thanks again to our guests, Dave and Dharmesh, and of course you, our listeners as well, for your support across the year. As mentioned, season 6 of the podcast will return in the new year, so keep an eye out for brand new episodes soon. As for FinTech Futures, you can find us online at fintechfutures.com, on X at FinTech Futures, and of course on LinkedIn. If you like this podcast and our other episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your favourite podcasting service to get notified about future episodes. Thanks as well to Arama for editing this podcast. You can check them out at arama.tv. And wishing all of our listeners a very happy holidays and new year. And I hope you all enjoy a well-earned break. We'll see you soon for another episode of What the FinTech. But until then, goodbye.